the very first things that you typically do when you meet a new person is you greet them, right? So one of the things that's a crucial piece of that is that handshake. If you've never gone out and actually shaken hands with somebody and asked them for an honest feedback of what that handshake was like, I would really encourage you to do that today. It might take somebody off guard, so you might want to find somebody you really trust, but say, hey, how was my handshake? Because that tends to be such an important part of that initial greeting in American culture. If you have one of those limp fish handshakes or a knuckle breaker that makes your fingers hurt after you've shaken hands with somebody, even those political things where people use like two hands and pat you on the forearm, very patronizing, by the way, any of those are going to create a negative first impression. So find out what your handshake is. What message are you sending? Practice your handshake and ask somebody to give you some feedback. Along with that handshake, when you're meeting someone, if you're sitting down, you want to make sure you stand up. That gives you a full, hey, I'm present and I'm interested that you're here and I want to really truly meet you. Make sure you're making good eye contact. And even if you're not normally a smiler, smile when you meet someone new. That shows that you're engaged and that you really care about that person that you just met. Now you want to know how to make proper introductions if you are now the introducer between two other people, and sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. The good news though is that there's one easy little tip. You don't need a lot of fancy words when you're introducing people. All you need are this and is. So if you're introducing people, you would say the first person's name, this is, and then the second person's name. You don't need to say, oh, I'd like to introduce you to, or I'd like to have you make the acquaintance. None of that is necessary. This and is are all you need. Now the other challenge is knowing whose name to say first. And there's a really easy rule. Whoever has the most importance role between the two, or age, or whatever the case may be. So the more important person's name is said first, this is, and then the other person's name. So in business, that most important person we generally look at based on title. So if you're introducing the CEO of your organization to a work colleague, then the CEO would be more important. But say it gets a little trickier because you've got two people who are both the same level. At that point, you would then defer to age or length of time at the organization. So if the person is older, then they would be more important. Or if they've been at the company for 10 years versus somebody who's just started, the person who's been there for 10 years would be more important. Sometimes it gets even a little bit blurrier than that. And in those cases, you don't want to ask somebody like, well, how old are you? If you can't tell, don't ask. However, just in those cases, pick somebody. Whoever you want to put first is fine. The one exception to the title rule is if you're introducing somebody to a customer or a client. You've probably heard the old saying that the customer is always right. In this case, the customer is always most important. So even if you're introducing a customer to the CEO of your company, you would want to say the customer's name first, this is, and then the CEO's name. The other piece is, how do you do the closing? So say you're at a networking event and you've been talking to somebody for a long time. I would encourage you to sort of write up and memorize that closing line before you ever even attend the event. One of my favorites, and please don't tell anybody, but one of my favorites is to make the person that I'm talking to feel like I'm doing them a favor. So what I'll say is something along the lines of, I'm sure you have a lot of people that you really want to meet today, so I don't want to monopolize your time. But it's been really nice meeting you, and I look forward to staying in touch. And then I kind of walk off. So that makes it seem like I'm doing them a favor, when in reality, I want to go on and talk to other people. But like I said, don't tell anybody my secrets, right? So both that introduction and that closing are going to make you feel a lot more confident when you're meeting new people, but they also help you to give another person respect. Another way to give people respect is to pay attention to what they're doing and what they're saying. I think that can be challenging when you're in a conversation, because we tend to want to think like, what's the next thing I should be saying? Or how should I be responding to that? And as a result, we kind of get in our own heads and we're not reflecting on what they're saying, and we're not in the moment. So it's really important to be in the moment, focused on what that other person is saying. Along those same lines, how many times have you forgotten somebody's name? So what do? If you've forgotten somebody's name, I would just say, go ahead and ask again. Now, the key here is the second time you ask, you really want to focus in on what they're saying and try and remember that name. But it's better to ask again than to walk around not remembering that person's name. Because what happens if somebody else comes up and now you're in a position where you're trying to introduce somebody and you can't remember their name? I've heard of many couples or groups of friends who will have a little signal with each other if they've forgotten somebody's name, so that person can, wink their eye or whatever, and an additional partner will come in and say, hey, I am, and introduce themselves, so that way that person's focused on saying their name again. That is a good trick. But I think most people would rather have you say, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. Could you tell me again? Rather than you calling them the wrong name or just not ever referring to them by name. In fact, in many cases, when you say that, they'll say, you know what, I'm the same thing, I don't remember your name either. So then you can go through that again. Like I said, once you've asked for that name, you want to try to remember it after that second time, if at all possible. Also, I think it's really important in professional settings to truly learn how to mix and mingle, how to network. One of the key pieces of that is to be positive when you're meeting new people. You never know who knows whom or who works where until you've actually talked to them a while. So you could be in danger of, if you're whining and complaining, saying something negative that could come back and not just create a negative first impression, but a negative lasting impression about you. I had an employer one time talk to me about one of my students who was actually looking for a job. And he came up to that employer and started complaining or sort of saying negative things about that employer's competitor, which the student thought, oh, I'm going to win myself over by saying bad things about their competitor. But actually the employer said, I just looked at that student as negative in general, not that it was a good thing that he was saying bad things about my competitor. So the more positive you can be, the better. Now, certainly, we all need our areas that we need to vent and just be frustrated, but do that in a safe space. Do that with a really close friend, maybe even somebody who doesn't work with you, because the more even if you've got close friends at work, then that starts to create a negative morale around the organization. So find a friend, find a significant other that you can vent to in a safe place. All right, so if you're going to mingle and network, I mentioned that. There's a couple of quick tips just to keep in mind that'll make that process a little bit easier. One is go in with an agenda. If you've got a purpose for being there, maybe I want to meet 3 new people. That's your purpose. It gives you a little bit more confidence. The other thing is look for people who are standing by themselves, because chances are good that person is really going to welcome someone coming up and talking to them. So they're going to be more open to talking with you. Always want to keep your name tag on your right shoulder. And you will go to an event and you'll see tons of people with name tags on the left, name tags on the right, name tags on their hips. The main reason you want it on that right shoulder is because if you're shaking hands properly, where you're squarely facing one another, making eye contact, your eyes naturally go up that arm to that right shoulder. And so it makes it a lot easier to just quickly look there to see what that person's name is. If there aren't sort of guidelines as far as what to put on your name tag and you're actually making your name tag yourself, just make sure you use your best handwriting so that it's legible, and always put your full name. Unless it's a more casual thing, then hopefully people would say, go ahead and use your first name only.